Well, first of all, thank you very, very much for coming to this session. And I'm Oliver Chow. I'm working for the South China Morning Post. But at the same time, I have other writing assignments in various media. And some of you might hear my voice on radio as well. I'm very delighted to be assigned this session because I'm very honored to be on stage with three very honorable writers, Hong Kong-based, but yet writing in English. Reading their books get me to ask one question. How are they going to write about Hong Kong in English different from other books written in Chinese? And with that question, I found a very good quote in Jason's book when he says, when stories we know are told in a different language, even the familiar and the mundane can spring to life. So I was thinking, what if one writes in Russian, or what if one writes in French? Would that make Hong Kong appear differently, accordingly? So this is the kind of interesting thoughts I have in mind when I was given this assignment. So I'm very delighted to have three of them, two writers and one photographer, all professional, to be sharing with us their passion of writing Hong Kong in English and what went through their minds when they write their books. And so perhaps we can now give the time to the three of them to make a very brief introduction of themselves to pave the way for the next 70 minutes for us to share. Perhaps we can start with Jason.
Sure, thanks, Oliver. Thank you very much for coming to this workshop. I mean, it's a really great honor to be here, and especially alongside Ira and Nicole. My name, as you know, is Jason Ng. I was born and raised in Hong Kong. I left Hong Kong as a sort of a young teenager, and then I moved to sort of Canada and the US and Europe as part of the Hong Kong diaspora leading up to the 97 handover. I repatriated back to Hong Kong about 7 years ago now. And I moved here from New York. There's a lot of similarities between New York City and Hong Kong, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. I started blogging 4 years ago, really out of sheer luck, I guess. I didn't intend to become a writer, but my web designer said I needed to put something on my website, and so he asked me to start a blog, and that's how my writing started. And then slowly I just started to develop a following online, and then some of them asked me to turn it into a book, and that's how my book came into being 3 years ago. It was all sort of unplanned, and lo and behold, now people call me an author, so I felt like it just fell on my lap, and it's a really interesting feeling. But I don't want to hog the mic, but I will pass that to Nicole and Ira and introduce themselves. You know, I'm sure later on you get to know me more.
Ira, yes.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. This is a great opportunity for me. It's something that I normally don't do, of course, because I'm always on the other side of the camera. And I'm originally from the US, from a small town in New Hampshire. But I started traveling around the world as a 13-year-old. I went to the Soviet Union in 1967 with my parents. And once I saw that and other places like Scandinavia, I never stopped. I started traveling, became a passion. And I was always taking pictures since a young teenager. I started, my first work in photography was to work for an anti-war presidential candidate in 1971 when the war in Vietnam was very heavy, and there were pictures coming back from the war that I could see as these intense images came through magazines. It started to change the way people looked at war. It actually changed government policy. It forced the man who became president, Richard Nixon, to end the war. It was all about photography that made such an impact on the way people view the world. So at that point, I really knew that photography was what I wanted to do, and journalism was something that seemed to be the most important aspect of photography. And all of these pictures that were coming up from Cambodia and Vietnam also sparked an interest in Asia. So I actually did some traveling. I've lived out of the US since 1987, first in Sweden, and then I moved to Thailand. And in '94, I was asked to come to Hong Kong by a newspaper that was just getting started by the Oriental Daily News. It was an English language newspaper, and it was a good opportunity for me because actually I had had some difficulty working in Cambodia. I was in a helicopter crash and I injured my foot, and at that point I decided that maybe hardcore journalism wasn't really the thing for me anymore. So I came here and started working for the newspaper and then other magazines, many of which no longer exist, like Asia Week or the Far Eastern Economic Review. And as time went on, I worked for a company that did in-flight magazines and got into the beautiful aspects of traveling all around Asia and shooting feature stories for them. It gave me the ability to really get to know most of the countries in Asia. And then I had some difficulty with a medical situation for cancer treatment, which made it impossible for me to continue photographing because the medication gave me heavy side effects. And as a result, when things were starting to get better, I met Nicole, and we started working together on some feature stories. And before long, the book project came up, and this gave me a way to get back into shooting again when I had recovered from the side effects. And a new opportunity, so the whole world of photography started to open up again. And that's why I'm here. Thank you.
This is, well, I learned about what you just said just now, and I'm sure when I read your pictures again, they will all throw a different light, you know, and with all this rich experience behind you from Soviet Union to Cambodia, and now all of a sudden you're shooting Kowloon City and Kwun Tong and all that. I think that would be very interesting. And Nicole, would you have a word to share with us?
Yes, so thank you very much for coming, everyone. It's really nice to see such a big turnout and to be able to have this discussion. I'm a Hong Kong Eurasian, so I'm a little bit different from the other two people on the panel here. My grandfather came to Hong Kong in the 1920s, so we have quite a long family history here. I had my first book published, co-authored with Ira last year, and I'm currently working on a new book, which will also be sponsored by the Hong Kong Arts Development Council. So looking forward to having this discussion today. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Well, actually, we have decided to, first of all, have the panel discussion among the three of us, four of us, sorry. And I'm the moderator, but I won't be doing a lot of speaking, obviously. And then at the end, we try to open the floor as soon as we can so that you can throw some questions to our authors here. And maybe I start with the quote that I mentioned earlier, Jason, about writing Hong Kong in English. How is it different from writing Hong Kong in Chinese? Because you are the only Chinese author up here. Could you share with us how writing about Hong Kong in different languages could be different at the end?
Sure. I'm bilingual. I can read and write Chinese as well as read and write English. When I first moved back to Hong Kong, when I first started writing a blog, obviously the first questions I had was, should I write in English or should I write in Chinese? First of all, because of my personal experience, because of my education, I'm more comfortable with the written English than written Chinese. Second of all, I think I was also taking a look at what I wanted to write. The main subject matter that interests me, having not lived in Hong Kong for 20 years and coming back and looking at the place that I'm supposed to be very familiar with, and yet it seems quite strange to me at the same time, allow me to sort of look at the very mundane, obvious things that I observe in Hong Kong every day. And that's what I decided to write about. You know, so if you flip through my book and you look at some of the essays, I write about a shopping trip to City Super. I write about a walk at lunchtime when I went to the gym in Central, walking back to the office, and what I observed on Pedder Street, right? Things that sort of people would just completely glaze over and not pay any attention. That's the kind of thing I wanted to write about. So, and if I were to do that in Chinese, imagine writing about that Chinese. I think number one, it's been done a million times before, and there's a lot of Chinese writers out there who do that. And number two, when you write familiar things in the familiar language, it just will go a little flat. On the other hand, if I interpret the whole observations in English, it lends itself to sort of references that I grew up with outside of Hong Kong, because the magical about language is that it frames how you think. And there will be word associations that you wouldn't even think about, if you were to think about that in Chinese. For instance, I was writing about a pair of Filipino helpers on a minibus being yelled at by the bus driver for talking too loudly because apparently their talking disturbs the driving. So I compared them to Rosa Parks. Obviously, Rosa Parks is a well-known civil rights sort of advocate.
That's so funny because often, I think almost everyone has experienced a couple of Chinese that are Cantonese that are speaking so loudly that you can't even hear yourself think.
Exactly. But the moment you hear Tagalog is all of a sudden noise, right? Yeah. And another example is that I was, sort of very impressed or sensitive to the differences between Hong Kong Island and Kowloon. And it's interesting that Nicole decided to focus her book on Kowloon because growing up, my parents always instilled this idea to me that Kowloon people were very different from Hong Kong people. They were sort of rough and impolite and unhelpful. And so I decided to write an essay about comparing the differences between Hong Kong Island and Kowloon. And I was able to compare that to New York City, Manhattan to Brooklyn. So it's only through writing English that these sort of associations and cultural references can seep into the writing. So that's why I decided to write in English, despite my ability to write in either languages.
I just cannot agree more. I remember I used to hate Chinese history because of all the names and facts and years I had to memorize. But at the end, I went to the United States to study Chinese history. Writing in English, which gave me a totally different experience. I was taught to write about, to look into the pattern, the kind of concepts and terminologies used in, looking at Chinese history. So it really highlights the difference, of writing a given subject by using different languages. So in this case, we are talking about English. I'm sure other languages would pose similar experiences. In your book, Jason, you have a very good quote. You said, 37 views of a city that doesn't blink. And then immediately I was asking myself, is that you or the city? With the coffee shops and the internet, a city doesn't blink. Is it the person or the city that doesn't blink?
Well, that's actually the subtitle of my book, 37 Views of a City That Doesn't Blink. I mean, obviously, I borrowed that phrase from New York being the city that doesn't sleep, and I thought Hong Kong really takes it one step further because if anyone who's been in New York, you go to Times Square at 3 a.m. in the morning, you'll be surprised. Everything is shut down. Like, everything is closed. And, this is a city that does sleep. Come on, right? And then when you come to Hong Kong, you go to Causeway Bay, you go to TST, and you realize, oh, my God, this is a 24-hour city. So I wanted to take that one step further and call the city a city that doesn't blink. As to the question whether it's I who don't blink or the city that doesn't blink. Well, I don't get much sleep because I have a day job as a lawyer. And I write in my spare time, and I do a bunch of, I teach on the weekend. I'm part of a singing group, so I do a whole variety of things. on that account, I consider myself a quintessential Hong Kong person because, that's what Hong Kong people do. We do many different things. We try different things and see what sticks, right? And so that's what I'm trying to do. So I guess you can call me a person that doesn't blink.
All right, we had that movie established in Seattle many years ago. 37 views. Why those 37 views, Jason? Why would you think those 37 views represent the Hong Kong you want to write about and you want your readers to know about?
Well, when I decided to write the book, I think about the average Hong Kong reader. And the average Hong Kong reader is impatient. They want to get information right away. So I wanted to break it up into digestible doses so people can read on the MTR, they can read on the bus, 3 minutes, and they get off the bus, and then they can put the book away and then pick it up later without thinking, oh, who is this character again? What page am I on? So that's the reason why I decided to publish a collection of essays, because it's easier to digest. And then I broke up the 37 essays into 3 categories: the people we see, the things we do, and the places we go. That's, again, borrowing a very famous sort of expression, right? Because if you talk to someone in New York, they always say, well, I'm busy because I have people to see, places to go, and things to do. And that actually describes people in Hong Kong fairly well as well. So that's why I decided to do the 37. Now, as to why 37, I guess the reason was I borrowed that name from the 36 views of Mount Fuji, which is a very well-known sort of woodcraft paintings. And then I thought, oh, I'm just going to do a one-up on them and do 37.
I see. So that could be Victoria Peak.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Now we move on to the other 2 authors, Nicole and Ira. And your book presents Kowloon, to be precise, in both text and picture.
That's right, yes.
So chicken and egg, which one comes first, text or pictures?
Actually, in this case, the text came first. So at the time, I was working at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And my boss at the time was doing a research project on Guntong. So he suggested that I would maybe like to explore that area. And from there on, I decided to look at the 4 other districts of Kowloon, making 5 in total. Ira and I had done some work previously together, so when I decided to try to make the research into a book, I invited him to come along to illustrate what I was writing.
So text came first,
That's
and
right,
then
yeah.
the pictures. And how would the pictures work into the text? Does it work in a mutual way or one affecting the other? How does it work?
Well, I think the text was basically my guide for going out and shooting. And in some cases, they illustrate very specifically places or things that were mentioned in the text. In other
Also
cases,
people. Yeah, also
and people
yeah.
as well. But otherwise, because a lot of the time I just meandered on my own, I've discovered other things that complement the text rather than are literal to it.
Yeah, so mostly it was reactive, but in some cases, for example, in Kowloon City, I think there's some photographs of a karaoke lounge where Thai people go to hang out, and that was actually not mentioned in the text, but was something that Ira did. So I think we have some photographs here.
You should be starting with Kowloon City.
So that's Kowloon City?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Tell us about what this picture shows and how does it work into the text that Nicole presents.
Well, as you can see, it's not a typical scene for Hong Kong. Kowloon City is known for being an area where there are many Thais living there. And because I had lived in Thailand, it made it very interesting for me to see how Thais live when they're in Hong Kong as opposed to back home. And really, one can see that they're living almost identically to the way they live at home. The Buddhist monks come every Sunday and Saturday, so people are able to pray and give alms to the monks. This was, we went there together specifically after, because I speak Thai, So I found out from the Thai people that when the monks come. So we went back in order to see them.
But this was also one of the later field trips. So we'd already been to Kowloon City on a number of occasions and looked at the Teal Tower food there and also the Thai restaurants there as well. So this was a later field trip at the end of the book.
And when we were there, we talked to a lot of the domestic helpers who, on their Sundays, they're hanging around in one of the parks, as you see them playing cards, and they go to karaoke. They are basically doing everything they do at home. And when they have the time to meet each other, they meet in the park, they meet in the karaoke places, and enjoy themselves.
And in some cases, they're actually traveling from quite far, in some cases from Saigon, for example, just to meet their friends and to play cards and eat together and that sort of thing.
Okay, now, Ira, you just mentioned you speak Thai, and does that mean in this particular instance, the pictures come before the text?
Well, in some aspects, because although, I mean, I introduced Nicole to one of the helpers there, which then the interview became incorporated into the text. So in Kowloon City, I didn't really need the text because I could feel my way around. I could talk to people and get to know the area and ask them what's going on and where do you go, and in that way, it was much more cohesive of a cooperative effort, where instead of always the text coming first, which in most cases it was, in this case it was back and forth.
I see. Now, this is what interests me most. I'm sure as a Hong Kong person, when I go to Kowloon City, I rarely notice the Thai factor there. I would look for good restaurants or some, other things that interest me. That really reflects my own preference, if not my value. But through your eyes, you look at other things. That's why I am curious what our topic is about, writing in Hong Kong in English. How would that cultural thing affect the way you select your topic?
From my point of view?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I'm not writing, so I see with my eyes, and it's photography is an international language. It doesn't need somebody to interpret it. What you see is what you get. I mean, you might need a caption in order to understand that these are Thai people at a karaoke lounge rather than Chinese, because many viewers aren't going to be able to see the difference. I mean, some can automatically see it if you know Asia very well. But that's one of the things I like about photography, is because it can tell you the story without any language necessary. So it covers all languages.
Yes. And Nicole, you being a Eurasian, you of course have your unique angle when you select a topic or the text you want to present Hong Kong. But do you think these three pictures we've just seen, represent the unknown Kowloon that you want to present to your readers?
Yeah, I think it does, in fact. I mean, I think to many people, they don't necessarily know Kowloon City in this respect. But there are, of course, ethnic minorities in Hong Kong. One of them is the Thai community. So yes, I was quite pleased with what we found there.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Why did you decide to focus on Kowloon instead of doing sort of a pan-Hong Kong book?
Good question. Basically, we went to a lot of the bookstores in Hong Kong at the beginning, and I had a look at the titles and also the photography books that were being produced. And we found that things kind of fell into a certain category or certain categories. So there was kind of historical photographs or kind of sepia prints. And then there were a lot of photographs and works which fell into kind of an image of Hong Kong, as propagated by the tourism board, for example. So everything being very shiny, very superlative. So we wanted to show something that was very much at street level, something very ordinary in a sense.
Mm-hmm. For the audience information, the title of Nicole's and Ira's book is Kowloon, unknown territory. And we were just chatting before this session, and you told me about your background. Actually, you lived in new territories in Hong Kong, but not Kowloon.
That's right.
So
yes.
Kowloon has always been your unknown territory.
Yeah.
So how would you explore this unknown territory? Through what aspects do you focus it on?
Well, I mean, I really had a kind of blank sheet of paper. Even though I was working at the PolyU at the time, it's very much on the cusp of Hong Kong Island. So everything was new, but taking the names of the districts as kind of a general parameter proved a very good starting point.
And in fact, we're going to show you 3 more pictures
Yeah.
at another district of Kowloon. And this is the Kwun Tong district.
Right, yes.
Yes. So could you share with us why you would select this picture and what's the story behind it?
Well, when I went to Kwun Tong, actually, I was kind of surprised by there seemed to be more colors, and the pastels of the buildings were somewhat different than what I found on Hong Kong side. And it was a very busy place, but at the same time, there are areas that feel very much of a neighborhood. And so much of Hong Kong and Kowloon kind of loses that feeling of neighborhood. But when you get to the wet market and you get into the smaller lanes, the area that has the beef noodles, I don't know how you say that in Chinese, but Ngao Lam Mian.
There.
It's a whole little lane that all they do there is beef noodles, and you could see that the people that ate there were regulars. Some of them might have come from other areas, but I'd say that most of them were some people from within the area, just dropping in from their offices or coming in from after school. We'd see school kids there in the afternoons. And it's so busy at lunchtime. I had to be very careful to stay out of people's way because the waiters are running back and forth, and they didn't mind me shooting as long as I didn't stop anybody from getting their meals or making their money for the day.
Well, there is always a saying that when a foreigner, writes or shoots about Hong Kong, he or she sometimes tends to be romanticizing. Like Susie Wong, I love there's a many splendid thing. That sort of. When you select these pictures, are you aware that this is the kind of pictures you want to present to the Western readers? Or do you think these pictures are just your own choice?
Well, I tried to give a diverse selection and to put enough images about each area or each subject that show various sides of it. And then if it's an area that's about food, there would be a food picture, but it also had to include the people eating or the chef. I mean, in this case, you have this very kind of almost a Renaissance look of a man.
It's kind of moment of respite amid a very kind of busy, busy setting. So I don't know if it's really a kind of romanticized thing. I mean, after all, this is a very common scene to be seen across Hong Kong.
Well, at least you're not showing the intestines and all that in the picture,
Oh, we did some.
Not too close.
All right. All right. And what about you, Nicole? When you select, I'm sure there are 5 topics you have selected for your coverage of the unknown Kowloon territory. You talk about food and community and other subjects. And could you tell us something about why those 5 areas you think are sufficient to cover the unknown territory of Kowloon?
Sure. I think food is very often associated with Hong Kong, deservedly so, but it wasn't something that we wanted to specifically focus in on. So we wanted to try to show a kind of wide parameter of things, but at the same time needed some structure, which is why we decided on those 5. Of course, it could have been less or it could have been slightly more, but it was a good way to start.
And now I have the table of content here. Community, consumerism, art, food, and lastly, fashion and sex. And we have selected a few pictures here on the very last subject. sex. And let's see how, oh, this is not it, sorry.
There's one more before we get to sex. This is what I was referring to about the business people coming for a business lunch. But you look at this group, and although they're probably enjoying their food, they don't look like they're enjoying each other's company much.
That looks like a busy lunch hour.
Yes.
But then again, it's quite possible that they don't know each other.
They probably don't.
Yeah.
They're probably sharing the table.
Yeah.
Sure. It just happens that they're all wearing business attire, and
Yes.
and of course it's probably a rushed lunch. And of course in many of these lunch situations, nobody has the time to chat. You eat and you run. You go back to the office. So I mean, you could see in the shot of the chefs, it seems to be this very peaceful moment. But if you were to turn around and face the other direction, you would see complete chaos in the whole restaurant. People running back and forth, everybody going in and out. But for that moment, there was a pause that somehow in that very brief second.
I'm sure if I were the photographer, I wouldn't even pay attention to this scene because I see it every day. Maybe I'm one of them eating there. So I don't see anything special about it. But through your eyes, you just brought out why you did it. And I find it goes right back to what Jason mentioned earlier. You know, the use of different languages to say the same thing, it will bring out something different. Yeah, Jason?
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Of course, I agree. That's what I said.
And as Jason points out, it's the ordinary moments that illustrate what life is really like here. And
but I think also if you've had some sort of distance, so if, for example, you've had experience of living in other places, you can see Hong Kong in a very objective way. So things that you wouldn't tune into become quite remarkable.
Yeah, since I mentioned the word sex, so let's take a look at the pictures here. And I'm going to show you three that Ira took in accordance to the text. And these are all in the Kwun Tong area, right? No, they are not.
This is in the area of around Temple Street, Mongkok, Jordan.
I see. So this is the second one. And the last one here is this one.
And I chose these images to show because they're not showing anybody's face, first of all, so they're anonymous. And this one, as you can see, a prostitute who is working the streets pauses for a moment to check her makeup in the rearview mirror of a taxi.
This is very interesting. How about the text, Nicole? How did you cover this part in your writing?
Well, actually, the text was wanting to focus, or I was wanting to focus rather, on male sex workers, because I found the subject of female sex workers already very well documented. But with male sex workers, it's not a street trade. So even though the text contains quite an extensive interview with one male sex worker, it was quite difficult to actually see and photograph.
May I just elaborate a little bit further, since you said you live in New Churches in Hong Kong, but not Kowloon, and now you cover Kowloon. What about New Churches in Hong Kong? How would this kind of thing happen in those two areas?
Well, I don't know too much about it, but I suppose Wan Chai would be a main locus in Hong Kong Island, also with minority groups such as Thais and Filipinos, for example, Filipinas, I should say. Beyond that, in the new territories, I'm not too sure.
Well, what I see in other places that you don't really see on the street, but if you know about Hong Kong, you know that the one-woman brothel is a legal enterprise in Hong Kong. So if you go into apartment buildings all over this city, Hong Kong side, Kowloon, New Territories, you might be getting off a lift at the wrong floor and realize the whole floor has pink lights going down with webcams in front of each door, and those are all single rooms that have prostitutes working on their own. This is a legal trade. You don't see people, prostitutes walking the street, except for really, I mean, the only place I've seen it like that is Mongkok, Jordan, that sort of area. And it's right off of Temple Street. It's not like it's very hidden. It's quite in an obvious way. Wan Chai, it's very different, of course. It seems to be the discos that have the trade surrounding the discos and within. But again, you don't really see streetwalkers so much.
And in your course of shooting, have you encountered any hostility, any reaction, or you have a particular way of shooting that would get you out of those troubles?
Well, of course, I wasn't very comfortable going out and going after the prostitutes. That's, you know, I know there are people out there watching over them, that they have protectors or pimps that are keeping an eye on the street, watching for police. And I had to be very discreet. Because I'm used to working with manual focus cameras in the days of film, I'm quite adept at using a camera at somewhat wide-angle lens, estimating the distance, and keeping it at my waist. And what I would do is I'd see something happening. I'd see a girl, even sometimes walking across the street, like the frame before, and have my camera at the waist, but I've already guessed what the distance is. So I would look over my shoulder in another direction, not even at the girl, and be snapping the shutter while she doesn't see what I'm doing. So not only the pimp doesn't know what I'm doing, the girl doesn't even know what I'm doing, and sometimes they're looking right at me. But my camera's here, and I'm kind of gazing around like the average tourist at the buildings or the whatever's happening, and grabbing some pictures along the way. So I keep myself out of trouble.
Maybe the girl thought you could be a potential client or something.
I think so.
And with the three of you having lived abroad, yeah, when you do the narrative about Hong Kong, would you bring that overseas experience in your writing in a comparative way? Jason?
Oh, I think definitely. I mean, that's one of the things I focus on, is to try to have this sort of dual sets of lenses. You know, so one side of my eye is looking at Hong Kong as an insider, the other eye is looking at Hong Kong as an outsider, and it makes everything more three-dimensional, I think. So it's kind of like wearing your 3D glasses when you watch a movie. Things sort of, you know, pops up, and I think it takes an, you know, sort of spending times overseas to give you the objectivity, to give you the frame of reference that there are different ways of doing things, there are different approaches to the way we think, and then you contrast that with the way people think and do it in Hong Kong, and that's how, you know, it becomes a story.
Would that get you more critical about the local scenes when you compared the good things abroad? Because that's always the case with some writers who live abroad, and then they always use that experience to compare what they see in Hong Kong, and then they start criticizing it sometimes, perhaps out of love, out of concern.
Right. Well, on the one hand, I try not to be too critical because people don't like to read negative things, and it's easy to beat up on a culture because, you know, every culture has its pros and cons. So I try to focus on the positive. I try to be optimistic. I think on the good things about Hong Kong, I encourage people to stop and smell the roses and realize how lucky we are. On the sort of not so good things, and it's sort of a reminder that we have to keep improving. But on the other hand, I am quite critical in my writing, and the criticality came from nothing else but my love for Hong Kong, because the way I look at Hong Kong is the way I look at my family. If you see your siblings or your parents, there's something wrong or something they don't like, you say it to their faces. You don't act all polite and then you move on, because that's not love, right? So the way I treat Hong Kong is the way I look at my family. So if I like something, I compliment them. If I don't like something, I point it out right away.
Could you give us one example of your critical thing about Hong Kong in your writing?
Well, I think one issue that I hold very dear and near to my heart is the way foreign domestic workers are treated in Hong Kong. It's one of those very strange phenomenon that you will only find exists in Hong Kong. It is so weird, but it's such a pink elephant walking in the room that no one points out, that it is weird. It is the way we treat them or mistreat them. There's a lot of social injustice, everything from the living arrangement to the way we deny their permanent residencies when every other expat automatically qualifies for it in 7 years, and yet because of the skin color, because of the nature of their job, we deny them of that right. So that is something that I'm extremely critical about. I write extensively about it. So again, if my mom is racist or made a racist remark, I will call her out. I won't act all polite, smile and move on, because that's not the way you treat family.
That's Jason, the lawyer part of him, yes. And what about the two of you with your, overseas experience? How would you project that into your portrayal of Hong Kong?
Well, certain things that Jason said about his overseas experience also resonated with me and sound quite akin to my Eurasian experience. But it wasn't so much a kind of conscientious attempt to present Hong Kong in a certain way. It was just to explore, first of all, and then to present what I did find out. One area of the book which is perhaps a little bit more critical is the chapter on the Chilean nunnery, where there was all sorts of signage in this park, to the point that it was actually quite ridiculous sometimes, and it kind of pointed to me to a very kind of instructive situation in which we're in Hong Kong, which is, sometimes a little bit silly.
And Ira, earlier you told me about one incident you encountered when you were doing some shooting in Cambodia. The funeral, the state funeral of that, yeah. And the reason why I bring this out is because I would like you to share with us how is it different, shooting in Hong Kong than shooting in elsewhere in the world that you have been share with us.
Yeah, well, and I rarely have times when I have conflict when I'm taking pictures, because I think my approach is usually very non-threatening, and I think people can see that they don't have anything to fear as I approach them. Maybe it's something to do with just my easygoing personality or the way I greet them with my eyes. I'm not so forward normally, unless it's say a press situation where you have to really push. And actually, coming from Thailand to here, when I moved, I was used to really being noticed, because when I lived in Thailand, there were a lot less foreigners there from 89 to 94. I was used to people noticing me everywhere I went and smiling and being very inviting. And when I got to Hong Kong, I felt like I disappeared because people ignored me. And suddenly they weren't interested in me, maybe because of being a colony for so long and having Brits here. The Cantonese were just kind of, I felt, a bit brash and not welcoming. This changed over the years as I began to learn some Cantonese, and I think after '97, when the Brits were already gone, they started to recognize foreigners, that we weren't all British, and that we weren't all this colonial yoke that they had on them for so long. And then it became easier for me to shoot here. People did start welcoming me. As I said, just a few words of Cantonese, suddenly a scowl turned into a smile, and it became a different place.
Any example? What Cantonese did you speak to change that?
Lei ho ma, or Mgoi sai, things like that. Or I could purchase things and ask for one or two, or it made a big difference.
Thanks. Nicole?
No, I was just going to add to that it does seem to really make a difference if you speak a little bit of Cantonese. You know, the kind of atmosphere that you're greeted with is quite different because, you know, people really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that is very true, especially taxi drivers. When you begin to talk to them in Cantonese, they would really appreciate and start to tell you a lot of stories sometimes. And okay, I have come to our last question before I open the floor. And this is a very philosophical, well, not philosophical, but interesting question that I would like to pose to you. Fair and objective portrayal of Hong Kong, is that possible or desirable? Do we need a fair, objective portrayal at all? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's always good to be fair, so that's a desirable thing in my view. And as I said previously, in our book, we really wanted to capture what is there. So we weren't going in a kind of any preconceived direction other than to just show what was there.
And you mentioned earlier you're working on the next book.
Yes, that's
on
right.
Hong Kong Island.
Yes.
Not unknown anymore, is it? No?
Well, I mean, it's also dealing with a kind of unknown aspect, which will be oral testimonies with blue-collar workers, so people whose job situates them frequently on the streets.
So how is it going to differ from this unknown territory Kowloon book?
Well, this one is mostly kind of essay style, so the other book will be oral testimonies, so the words were the stories of people from themselves. So it will be quite natural in flow.
I see. Okay. And Jason?
The question is how important it is to write objectively. I actually have a quite different take from Nicole's. As a matter of fact, I try not to write objectively because I don't want my writing to read like Wikipedia. It must have an opinion, it must have a stance, it must have a ground to stand on. And so I think it's much more important to write authentically than to write objectively. And I don't want to lose authenticity because I'm trying to be objective. And that's one of the reasons why I named my blog As I See It, because I wanted to make it very clear that that is just my way of looking at Hong Kong. It might not be your way. But if you happen to disagree, to agree with me, that's great. If you disagree, then let's talk about it. And I welcome dissent. Unlike the Chinese government, I welcome dissent. And so an example is that recently, well, not recently, last June or July, I went to the Rugby 7. Is it in June or July? Or was it in May?
It's March.
March. It's funny because I go every year. And after that, I wrote an article for the SCMP, South China Morning Post, about my take on Rugby 7 and how it's a complete non-event among the local population. The only way that people know that Rugby 7 is going on is because traffic is terrible in Causeway Bay. That's the only thing, whereas in the expat community it's a big deal. It's like an annual carnival, it's bigger than Christmas. So that's what I wrote about, but that apparently really offended some big supporters of the Rugby 7. People really, sort of hold this so close to their heart that it is almost an untouchable subject. But
You mean amongst Chinese people or amongst the expatriate community or both?
expat. I think the expat, well, and I could tell from the sort of the tone of the comment as an expat that he or she was so upset that I insulted one of the sort of sacred events of Hong Kong. It's so rare for Hong Kong to be able to host an international sporting events, and how dare you, talk negatively about it. You don't understand the game. If you don't like it, don't go. I mean, that kind of rhetoric. But I liked that because it reminded me, sort of how that's what's great about the world. People think differently about the same thing. And so I don't hold objectivity as sort of as important as authenticity.
And the fact that someone did read your article, right?
Oh, that's true.
And Ira?
Well, I mean, in these days, everybody seems to want to be politically correct and are willing to modify what they say in order to make it non-inflammatory to any particular party. And I think in doing a book like this, where it's really covering such a broad area, I think it's important, at least from my side of view, to show all sides and to show from high to low, different levels of society, people at street level, poor people, working people, you know, big fat cigar smoking guys, and people pushing beer carts to make their living. And in this case, of course, I felt it was important to show a real cross section, and in that way, it is a pretty fair portrayal.
I think that's the interesting thing about Kowloon as well, in that it is such a cross-section naturally that, I mean, you can't help but capture it unless you would be trying not to.
Yeah, if you have your eyes open and you're observant of what's around you, then you see all sides of it. I mean, if you cover the area and make your way around, you'll see all things. And it's very different than if you're doing a focused story on a particular portion of it. I mean, if I was just going after West Kowloon, you wouldn't see the same things that you'd see in Sham Shui Po.
That's right, West Kowloon. That is real unknown territory in Kowloon. And I don't know how many more years it will remain unknown. But anyway, as an author myself, I always feel the book that I produce is like my baby. And I published my first book in 2010. It's a 700-page book. And it attracted a lot of different reactions, and I like it a lot. If it were like my baby, my child, and people comment on the growing up boy or girl, whatever, I would feel very sometimes defensive. Oh, well, this is not fair, blah, blah, blah. How would you feel about the book that you produce? And perhaps a few brief comments on this book you have produced that has your imprint, your signature, and everything in there. How do you look at it now? Say a few words, please.
Well, I think we're both very proud to have come to the end of the project. It took rather a long time to do, so it's always nice to see.
The labor is over.
Yes. So it's always nice to see a final product. So I think the general overall feeling is one of relief, but also being quite pleased with having put something like this out, which is quite different from my view of the English language portrayals of Hong Kong.
Would you like this child to be more handsome, taller, or, you know, how would you like more of what we already have with you? Or you're perfectly happy with it?
Oh, I might make a few changes if I was to do it again. I'd like to see it in hardcover. And, but no, I'm very happy that I was able to show, because you know, when I started in photography, it was all about shooting on the street and in art school, and everybody seemed to be a street photographer. That was the genre that was happening in the mid-'70s. And I've been able to show that I can do that very well, and I've received a lot of praise over it, and I'm quite confident now that this is something that's allowed me to regain a certain feeling of pride in my work. So I'm very pleased.
And if I may add, as an author who writes about Hong Kong, I go to bookstores all the time. I look at the Hong Kong section all the time because that's sort of my section. And every time I see your book on Kowloon, I'm very encouraged, because in my book I called Kowloon the Hong Kong Island's ugly sister, is sort of the dark side. the Kowloon skyline is never photographed, and to have a book dedicated to Kowloon, I think is really wonderful. I think it's the vindication of Kowloon.
Thank you.
If I were to ask you to select one particular portion of your book that you are most proud of, what would that portion be?
Well, there was a piece of text actually in the Kowloon chapter which included an interview with one of the Thai domestic helpers, and I was quite moved by that interview. It was with a lady who was 66 years old. It was her 4th placement in Hong Kong, and she'd been to a number of other countries beforehand working. And the way that she described Hong Kong was really as a kind of city of dreams, a place of opportunity, even though her salary is obviously something that most of us would regard as being very small. So,
And
on my side, I'd say the way I illustrated Temple Street, because of the diversity of what I was able to find there. Is you think of Temple Street as being a very touristic destination, but in reality, there's a lot of community there. I mean, between the dim sum places and people coming out of their apartments to sing karaoke or to practice Chinese opera, the fortune tellers, a lot of the food vendors, it's local people doing real things and not just people coming there to shop in the street market. So there's so many different aspects of it, and it created, I think there's more pictures of Temple Street than any other subject in the book. And it was just because I couldn't resist the ones that I had. I wanted to try and kind of break it up evenly between all areas, but there was just so much that came out of Temple Street, a very rich area.
that reminds me of a nickname of Temple Street. It's called the nightclub of common people. Yeah, that's what some people call it. And you, Jason, which portion of your book you would like to share with us that you are most proud of?
I guess it would be the illustrations. There are 37 essays in the book, and each essay has a pen drawing, and it looks something like this. And it's done by my father, and it's such a great feeling to do a father and son collaboration. It really brought us closer together and made the project a lot more meaningful. Right now I'm working on my second book, and I'm already feeding him with information as to what to draw. But I like your analogy to carrying a baby, writing a book, because I'm pregnant again. I'm working on my second book, and I mean it really does feel like a pregnancy because I'm stuck at home all day, writing. I have my full-time job. As soon as I finish in the office, I go home and I write. And then once the baby is born, the baby's life takes over your own life. And I would go to the bookstore, and whenever I see someone picks up my book, I would sort of hide in a corner and see how long he stays with the book and which chapter he flips to. Because, I mean, it's like a child. I mean, you want to know how your child is doing.
Yes, I have my next one coming up too. The delivery date is August 15th. I'm very apprehensive about it. But anyway, well, thank you so much for the three of you sharing with us such profound thoughts behind your opuses. And once again, congratulations. And advance congratulations to your future endeavors. Yes?
Thank you.
And now we are very good on time. And please share with us what you have in mind. And I open to the floor for any questions. And please pose us some very challenging questions about Hong Kong or whatever. We have the three authors here.
First, I want to thank you because I've read both the books, and they're fantastic. Kowloon really became more of an enlightened city because friends and we usually talked about the dark side, and it really became a more place to go and check out. So that was fantastic. And Jason, for your book as well, it just gives you a very different perspective on Hong Kong, and a just very personal way, and it helps to consider it in a different way because I just moved here about a year ago, and it's usually kind of hard to find stuff that's beyond a regular guidebook. So that was fantastic work. Thank you. Just bring out more books. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And but you said your book Kowloon was actually sponsored by the Arts Council, and I would just like to know if they actually, because I had the feeling not only the article on the nunnery was a little critical, but the comparison between Langham Place and the Maury Towers as well.
Wow, you've really read the book. That's great.
I did. No, and so I would just wondered if they actually, you know, kind of tried to influence your work in a certain way, or if they just kind of like let you go freely.
No, I mean, they don't try to influence. So in fact, we have a kind of logo here in the front cover which says that they, while they support the book, they don't necessarily agree with the views expressed in the text.
Okay, cool. And then also a question for Ira. The whole picture taking thing, did you actually have to go and get and ask anyone for their permission, really? Or did you just publish it in the book in the end and people were okay with it? Or they're just...
Occasionally I asked permission when it was like going into the karaoke place, for instance, but actually I misunderstood what they said. I thought they said to come back the next day and they'd put a sign up that said somebody was going to be taking pictures, but actually what they meant was, see, this is where my Thai is not perfect. They said that if I wanted to take pictures and have a party there, I could come and take pictures and have my own party. So I showed up and started taking pictures. And after a few minutes they said, but you can't do this. I was like, well, I thought you said I could. And I got my picture anyway.
Cool, thank you so much.
Actually, I don't think, well, we never consulted with anybody, but anybody that did ask, say in the Maido restaurant, we asked the manager if it was okay to take pictures, and he said it was all right. Other than that, we never asked anybody for permission to use their photos.
Thank you.
This is Hong Kong. We don't have to do that.
Well, wait till a lawyer gives his remarks. Yes, Jason. How would this issue, how, from a lawyer's point of view, taking pictures of someone without permission and publish it, how does it work in the legal world of things?
You didn't say you're going to ask me legal advice. I think it comes down to the issue of privacy and whether you're in a place where there is a reasonable expectation of privacy. If you're on the street and if you happen to be in the area and you come into the frame, then I think it's okay. You don't need permission. But I mean, don't call me on that.
I can hear your voice is getting softer and softer. All right, next question, please. The lady in the front.
Good afternoon. I have two questions to all guests. Well, did you encounter any difficulties in writing the book and capturing photos for the book because texts and pictures are still, but Hong Kong's culture is so is fast-moving and ever-changing. And how do you stand out in such a vast number of books that are also documenting Hong Kong? Thank you.
Excellent questions. Yes.
I think our book is slightly different because of the format. So it's kind of, almost a square shape, and it is a very vivid account with the photographs and also a very modern, contemporary account. So hopefully it fits in with the dynamism that you mentioned.
I only occasionally encountered any difficulties shooting it. There's one picture in Chungking Mansions where you can see a hand coming into the frame because I was photographing some ladies that were shopping in there, some South Asians, and a man suddenly stuck his hand in. As I shot my first picture, he was very quick. He got his hand right in front of me, and he told me that I should ask them for permission, that I couldn't just take their picture. So then I asked the ladies for permission, and of course they all agreed. And I shot a few more, but the one that I used was the one that with his hand coming into the frame. But I think that was probably the only place where I encountered any resistance. Otherwise, everybody was quite okay.
I forgot the question, sorry.
Hong Kong is a fast-moving
Yeah.
community, way of
Yeah.
life. How would you capture it in one still picture or text?
I think that's what makes writing about Hong Kong interesting, because it's so dynamic and you have to, and one of the things that I have to be careful about is not to write a book and then 6 months later the information in there is out of date and that no one would buy the book anymore. So I tend to write about more universal themes rather than current affairs. I love current affairs. I'm really into local politics, but that I leave to my blog and my writing assignments for newspapers and magazines. For my book, I tend to focus on sort of the more universal themes.
And that may be easier for your father to put the drawing in there as well. Any other thoughts you share with us? Yes?
Good afternoon. Ira, I've noticed that in all the photos you've showed us, there are people in it. Are the people you are most interested in, or is it the place that is so crowded that you can't avoid people?
Well, there are definitely times when I'd like the people to get out of the way. But I'm really a people person, and that's, I think, what has driven me in my photography all over Asia and anywhere in the world where I am. I like people. I like to get into their lives. I like to discover something about them and make contact, get to know them a little bit, even if it's very brief. At times it can be very long. I mean, I would sit down with the guy that brings the beer into the karaoke lounge and talk with him for an hour while I'm out shooting, or any kind of situation like that. I'm very happy to just take my time and get to know them and get to know the place. That allows me to discover much more and learn more as I travel. So people is, I'd say, I mean, when you see that it's mostly people, that's what mostly interests me.
So you do engage your subject, you do
I
stop
do.
and talk to them.
Not always, but I usually at least make eye contact. Sometimes the eye contact is momentary. Sometimes it turns into a conversation.
And when you talk to them, do you find that they open up to you more because you're a foreigner, or do you find that they sort of just pad the answers with what you want to hear?
I think it goes both ways. I don't think people really talk to me in a way that is trying to please me as the person that's asking the questions. They want to tell me something about their lives, or if I happen to ask them something about what they're doing, or, there's one guy that's pushing a trolley with, I don't know how many cans of beer. There was another guy I saw loading, with a friend, loading crates of beer so that he could carry them on his back, and I asked him how many he could carry. We got into a whole thing where they were demonstrating how many racks of beer, and one guy had 12 crates of beer on his back that he carried up the stairs to the karaoke lounge. And these are the things that fascinate me about people's lives.
So actually, how many pictures have you used in this book? Out of how many?
I think there's 128 pages of pictures, so I think it was about 140. And I narrowed that down from a little under 500, but I shot thousands of pictures over on and off for a few years.
Is it a painful process for you to make that?
Very difficult to narrow it down. It probably would have been easier if I'd been working with somebody like an editor to help me cut things away, but because you develop a very personal view to your photos, and it becomes somewhat difficult to see what somebody without the knowledge of the subject would see when they look at the picture, because I have such intimate knowledge of each picture and what was happening and what it says to me or what I'm trying to say. It's hard to divorce yourself from that and go with selecting pictures on a purely visual basis that somebody will get even without any knowledge.
Tell me about it. I have my articles always sub-edited out, you know. It's a painful thing to see off the record. Yes, any other comments? Yes, gentleman there, please. Wait for the mic, yes.
I have a question about the language aspect of this discussion, and that's the thesis is that the writing in English makes the perspective different. And my question to all your writers is, if these books would be translated into Chinese, first, is it possible to translate it? And second, what would happen with the perspective?
We have that movie Lost in Translation, right?
Yeah.
A few years back. But anyway, speakers?
I think in terms of the content of my book, it probably wouldn't make too much difference in terms of the understanding, although of course it would make it much more available to a wider audience. So in that respect, it would be a positive thing.
I've been approached to have my book translated into French and Italian, and I think that could work. But to have it translated into Chinese, I think it's very challenging, especially because I speak Chinese. And sometimes when I reread some of my essays, I try to think, oh, how would I redo this paragraph into Chinese? And I think a lot of the subtleties and the references will be lost. And I'm so afraid of, butchering my own writing because I'm eager to have it translated. I've never really thought much more about that beyond that point, but it's something to think about because like Nicole mentioned, it will widen the readership.
Ira?
I think with the photographs, they're universal. I mean, I don't think I would make a different selection if it were to be with Chinese text.
What about Chinese caption you used for your pictures?
That'd be a challenge. I'd need some help with that.
Dr. Wei, down there.
I'm a historian, so when you were talking about, I think everything is fascinating. I'm sorry, Oliver, I'm going out to buy the books right now. But it's, when you were talking about the neighborhood, I think it's Guantang, Guantang, the neighborhood in Guantang. It's, you could be describing Wanzai in the 1970s. You could be describing Macau before they got rich with the gambling casinos. So when you were writing, when you were thinking about the neighborhoods, do you ever think of it in the historical perspective? Because you're coming to Hong Kong and you're thinking of neighborhood. For me, I live in, can I make comments as well?
Yeah, please.
Because when we live in the university area, in Pok Fulam, and I shop in San Ying Pun, and for me, who cannot speak Cantonese, it is very much a neighborhood. New York City, to me, Yorkville is my neighborhood. I went to school there from 1948, 47, okay. And I lived there until 1970s. And when I went back just this time last month, I went to a butcher on 85th Street and 3rd Avenue, and they said, Mrs. Liu, how are you? Are you looking for the same sausages? So this is what I call neighborhood. Then another thing I want to ask you is when you are writing in English, which is not the language known to the local population. I don't want to say local population, but you know what I mean. Are you thinking of a wider audience, the entire local audience, or just the English language readers? I'm telling you this because I think I may be the first Chinese to be invited to write about Hong Kong, the stuff that you're writing on now, by the South China Morning Post. You don't know that. And at that time, I did write an article that I wrote, one article I remember, because when I wrote, I used my Chinese name because my husband asked me not to be identified, to be identifiable. But people found out, so I wrote about Chinese women preferring to go with Western men to their apartment to look at their paintings rather than Chinese men, because the Chinese men did not know how to handle the morning after. Everybody called my husband, they didn't call me. So you at least have people calling you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wei.
I do want to know if you write for just the English speakers or everybody else.
Your target readers.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the target readers are anyone who can read in English, because I don't write in Chinese. But those people could, of course, be from anywhere. They could also be overseas Chinese, so people who are interested in a different kind of perspective on Hong Kong and also Kowloon.
Because I have 2 academic books being translated back into Chinese now. That's worrisome.
Jason, you speak both languages. How? Well,
well, obviously, my target audience is whoever reads English. I try not to sub-segment them into sort of people who speak English as the first language or second language, because I write what I write, and and people buy my book for very different reasons. I mean, there are the expats and the newcomers to Hong Kong who buy the book because they want to know something about Hong Kong, and there are the sort of local readers who prefer reading English literature, and they buy my book. And there are parents who buy the book for their children because they want the children to be exposed to English language writing. So I try not to think too much about why people buy my book, because, like I mentioned earlier, I think authenticity is the most important thing to me. As long as my writing is authentic, I try not to have the readership influence what I write.
So does that mean for non-Chinese readers, they will never get the complete full picture of Hong Kong? They can only rely on the English narrative of Hong Kong then? And, the pictures would help, I'm sure. But what about the narrative, based on what you just said?
Well, I think that's inevitable, because if you don't read Chinese, then sure, you're going to miss out on the whole wealth of Chinese literature out there. And that's just the way it is. And it's the same with any other culture. If I don't read Thai, and if I go to Thailand, of course I'm missing out the entire sort of library of Thai literature.
But as the only person out of 3 that you can write both in Chinese and English, would you attempt to make up that, loss in your next book by trying to portray Hong Kong in English, but yet cover, the things that the English reader would be able to appreciate through your Chinese proficiency?
You mean would I write a Chinese book?
No, in English book, but yet you try to, put in the Chinese perspectives as much as you can.
Yeah, but see, my first book and the second book I'm working on, I'm not writing it from an expat point of view. I'm writing it from the Hong Kong Chinese point of view. It just so happened that the language is in English. But I think if the question is whether I would ever write in Chinese, I would love to. I think I just have to tweak the way I think a little bit, because again, language sort of frames the way you think, and I'm so used to sort of looking at Hong Kong in a certain way. I just have to readjust things a little bit. And certainly if I do that, I'm going to dramatically expand my readership. So it is definitely something I want to work on.
Hello?
Yes. Yes.
Now you're thinking of writing for a readership.
Yeah, well, right. So I started writing for myself, and the natural thing for me is to write in English, and that's why I did what I did. But then with
Well, now you have a readership.
yeah,
as
but
well.
now that I have a
Yeah.
readership and I've been approached by magazines and newspapers, they want me to attempt writing in Chinese. I think being a naturally intellectually curious person, I want to explore that. I want to see what that would lead. If it opens up a whole new way of thinking, I think I would really welcome that.
Do you dream in Chinese or in English?
Both. It depends on the context. That's the number one interview questions people ask in order to determine what your first language is, right? So,
What is your first language, though?
I think I'm bilingual. At home we speak Cantonese, but with my siblings we speak English sometimes. We're exposed to sort of Hollywood movies and American TV, so I think it's a little bit of both. But going back to the dream question, it depends what I dream about. If I dream about my parents, it will be in Chinese. If I dream about, I don't know, in New York, then it will be in English.
You never dream of your parents speaking English?
Sometimes it's very weird. Yeah.
I think I see a hand there, yeah? The lady there? Yeah. Oh, at the back, I'm sorry. The gentleman at the back first. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, mostly to Jason, what you think that we might be missing out on in how Hong Kong is documented in Cantonese and by just Cantonese writing authors. So, like, is there a really completely different perspective on how people would treat, blogging and...
Yeah, it's a great question. It's very different. I mean, it's really the best way to appreciate it. Well, if you don't speak Chinese, then it becomes a theoretical question, a hypothetical question. What if I spoke Chinese? What more would I be exposed to? I think the best way to appreciate it is to just go to the newsstand and buy a copy of the South China Morning Post, buy a copy of the Apple Daily, and compare the two. You will see the portrayal of Hong Kong from a day-to-day basis is vastly different. So that's the way I would answer your question, and that is exactly why I'm passionate about what I do, because I'm trying to bridge that gap. I'm one of the very few sort of Hong Kong-born writer who writes in English, and I'm hoping to inject that kind of authenticity to sort of to bring the expat communities closer to what the local person would see from his or her vantage point.
Yeah, have you got any examples? Like, for instance, or not even specifically yours, but say a local author and photographer were going to cover the Kowloon area in a sort of this is the neighbourhoods, this is the street sort of scene of these areas. How would they treat that subject, do you think? And writing in Cantonese.
So, for example, if you were to take one of our concrete examples that we show, perhaps that would make it easier. So, for example, the Guntong, photographs and text. So how would that be represented in Chinese? Or would it be? Even?
Right. I think as a foreigner or as an expat, you would just focus on the colors. You would focus on the complexity of the image. Whereas a local person would sort of sink the teeth more into, well, what is that store? What do they sell? Is it cheap? So your concerns become much more day to day, as opposed to taking it from 30,000 feet and evaluating the structure or the integrity of the picture. Another example is the book fair, for instance. In the Western or in the English language press, it would be viewed as a cultural annual event, attended by people who love to read, blah, blah, blah. But in the Chinese press, the portrayal is completely different. They focus on the negative. They focus on how it had been hijacked by the teenage models, how people sort of waited 5 hours in line in order to be the first in to get the limited edition so that they can sell it on eBay. Right? So, but that's the vastly different perspectives that people focus on. And if you only read the South China Morning Post, then you will miss out on that whole other half. Which is not to say one half is better than the other, just different. And in order to have a complete picture, being bilingual, would give you that advantage. But if you're not bilingual, then you just have to buy my book.
Okay, great, thanks.
Is there a hand back there as well? The gentleman? Yeah? No? The lady? Yes? Yes, share with us your thoughts. second question, I see. Well, exactly 3:30. Oh, we have one last question there. Yes.
Thank you. Regarding the issue with language, I would like to ask speakers your view on bilingual version.
What version? Sorry.
Bilingual.
Bilingual.
Yeah.
Have you thought of producing a bilingual version, and in order to accommodate both worlds?
I think, yeah, I mean, that would be a nice idea, but then I think also in terms of what we're writing about, I think that Kowloon is probably less of a dark side to Hong Kong Chinese people who speak Chinese than it is to foreigners. So I'm not sure of the necessity of doing that. But perhaps for another book, so for example, with my second book, that would be more of a consideration, perhaps, because of the format that I will be doing.
I'm actually working on a bilingual blog with my brother who primarily writes in Chinese. He lives in New York and he writes in Chinese. I live in Hong Kong and write in English. So that's your irony. But we're doing a collaboration. We're trying to put together a bilingual blog. I think that would be interesting. That would be a good way to test to see it works. It is possible that the English and Chinese translation are so different from each other that even if you put them side by side, it doesn't make sense. But that's what we are trying to find out. And if that works, then it will lead to sort of other projects like books or picture books and so on. So we'll see.
Well, one good thing about bilingual version is you can get those who want to learn both languages, read the Chinese and then English and then see how the translator does the job. And that's what I always did and still do since my student days, when I went to a classical music concert and I read the house program, first the English part and then the Chinese part. And then I don't know why I did that, but I would love to circle all the typo mistakes. And I still do. People hate me for that. And I see Paul Tam there somewhere, the Hong Kong Philharmonic marketing director previously. And yes, he can tell you a lot of stories about my picking on him. Well, anyway, is there one more last question you would like to throw to our guests before we close the session? Last chance. Yes, gentleman there. Sorry, wait till the microphone. Yeah.
Are your books available from Amazon?
Books available on Amazon.
My book is available on Amazon.com, but I'm working on the ebook version. I think that's sort of the question that more people ask. Yeah.
I think August 1st, our book will be available on Amazon. So I think they have something up there at the moment, so just a cover shot.
No, not an ebook. It'll be available through Amazon US.
And I think both books are available out there for autograph right now.
And available to order online from Blacksmith Books as well.
But then if you order that online, you won't get the autograph. You have 3 authors right here. Oh, with a discount. Thank you, Professor, as always. Okay, well, once again, thank you very much for big applause. Yes. I think it's you.